Well, good morning. Welcome this morning to this week's Truett Church Network webinar, getting our view right. This is the third part of what we've been talking about for now over a month on singing in church, and looking at, as we've had more of these discussions, I think more questions, more things have come up. And every week the world keeps changing in different ways that affects how we're worshiping and how we're thinking and our concerns and our considerations. And so we're really grateful today to have two worship ministers, Truett grads, with us to share about what they're doing in their churches, what they're learning through this, and then just to answer a lot of questions. Really, they'll share some. We have some questions. But if you are watching and have questions, type them into the chat feature, and as we go, you can do them now, and we'll get to them at the end or kind of as they fit into the discussion. So we want this to be a good discussion to get today together. So we have Matt Davis with us. Matt is a fairly recent Truett grad. I will say this, Matt and Jacob both were Truett worship leaders for Truett Chapel for a couple years each, I guess. Jacob, you might have done more than a couple years.
I did it 5 years.
5 years, wow. Okay, well, you get the record.
That's right. At least in music history.
And I, just so appreciative. I enjoyed so much sitting in worship with your leadership. I learned a lot of just music, being not musically inclined at all. I always enjoyed your arrangements and the differing styles of worship, the differing songs, the differing ways you led worship every week that I always appreciated. And I wish you were my worship ministers. I love my worship minister, Randall Bradley. If Dr. Bradley's listening, don't want to get that wrong, but your congregations are very blessed to have you leading on any given day, wherever you happen to be leading. Matt Davis is the minister of music at Greater Bosqueville Baptist Church, which is, if you're familiar with Waco, just outside of Waco, where he has served while he was in seminary and continues to serve since he has graduated. Jacob Sensenig serves as the, make sure I get that title right, Minister of Music and Worship Arts at Trinity Baptist Church in San Antonio. And you've been there, what, a couple years, Jacob?
3 years.
3. And Matt, how long have you been at Greater Bosqueville?
Going on 4.
4 years, okay. Jacob was previously the music minister at First Baptist Hamilton, pursuing PhD, correct, Jacob?
Yeah, ABD, so I'm hoping to finish the writing phase very soon.
Almost there.
Almost there.
Jacob's also married to Sarah, also a Truett grad, also on staff with college students at Trinity Baptist Church. Well, guys, let's jump in. So thank you again for joining with us today. I'm really thankful for both of you and your availability. Can you each give us maybe, and Matt, we'll just start with you since D precedes S in the alphabet. We'll go that way, right? How do we choose? Like the quick bio on how your church is worshipped, maybe a little bit about your church, just kind of who you are, a little bit on how you've worshipped kind of throughout COVID and how you are worshiping now.
Yeah, so Greater Bosqueville Baptist Church is a rural African-American church in the Bosqueville area. We have about 40 to 50 members, give and take. And our demographic is mainly of seasoned saints, I call them. But we do have sprinkles of youth and young adult. And during COVID, we have met online on Zoom for our Sunday school. And we've also met on Zoom for our Wednesday night Bible study. But our services have been pre-recorded. So our music and pastor will record his sermons on Saturday. And then those videos will be edited to one video that has been uploaded to YouTube for our members and for whoever wants to watch.
And so are y'all still doing that right now? Y'all are still pre-recording?
Yes, we're still pre-recording.
Boy, I think some in Waco have come back, and many of us want to, but we've certainly spiked the past week, and that may be pushing it further for those who are not already back. Mm-hmm. Jacob, tell us a little bit about Trinity.
Yeah, so Trinity is about a mile and a half north of downtown San Antonio. It's a congregation that I would use the phrase tradition to innovation to describe one of the characteristics. That's a Greg Jones, former Baylor provost thing. And they have been really innovative with inside the Baptist tradition we've inherited and lived in. And so worship has always been central to what we do at Trinity, but it's always been a really eclectic, diverse sort of thing within our tradition. And so that's really exciting, and that's one of the things that drew me here. Before COVID, we worshiped about 600 on a Sunday morning in two separate services. I primarily lead in the one on our Mulberry campus, which is choir and organ and orchestra and piano and all of that rhythm section. And then the other service is about a half mile down the street at our Tri-Point campus, and it's a contemporary service, band driven. And so we were doing that before March 8th. March 8th was our last Sunday where we were in two services, and the next Sunday we went to one service. We had typically done 5 or 6 combined services over the course of the year. So that was, and we've been working on a common repertoire of songs over the last couple of years so that we could do combined worship. So we were in a really great place when this started to be able to jump into it. We'd also been streaming for a while, live streaming, even though we didn't have a lot of people involved in live streaming beforehand. We were able to make that turn, that pivot without any real changes or having to buy new technology or any of that. We had the production staff in place. And so that was a real blessing for us that we were just able to do that. And we saw, like a lot of people, we saw a jump 4 times the number of people we would typically have in worship those first couple of weeks who were actively engaged, and it tailed off after Easter for sure. So we're still doing that, but we're also doing in-person. We started May 31st, going back to in-person, and we've had about 25% of our Sunday morning attendance coming. So anywhere from 125 to 175 in that range. We have required people to wear masks. We put together a protocols document that I can share with you, Matt, if you want to share that. We're blessed with a very large sanctuary, so we've gone far beyond the 6-foot distancing. We've marked off 2 rows of pews in between each household group. So we've taken as many of those kinds of precautions as we can. We also made a couple of videos talking about here's why we're taking the precautions we're taking, and going above and beyond. And for the most part, our congregation has been really receptive and glad that we're taking those precautions. There are some who think we're being too cautious, but we've erred on the side of caution. We're still trying to figure out, we were talking yesterday, a lineup of people who want to be baptized. And so we're trying to figure out how to do that and when to do that and how to do it safely. So we're getting into those kind of conversations now as we've reopened. But we've really made that pivot to digital content quickly. And we're also feeling the strain of creating so much digital content and now trying to do while doing in person. And, it's felt really nice to be in one service. And so I think some of us have some anxiety about going back to 2 services as well, and the extra workload with that.
I think whatever the new normal is, I don't know if any of us know that quite yet. After this, what we're going to do. Well, this is helpful. This is particularly why I, reached out to both of you, just being in very distinct churches. One smaller, one back, one not back, one larger, one primarily Anglo-white, one primarily Black, with different traditions feeding into that. Cover as many of our because it is, if you're in a rural church, it's a very different or not even rural, just smaller church versus bigger church, and it's a lot of considerations in that. So, we've talked about this. Dr. Emily Smith was on a few weeks ago and was just such a helpful webinar on some of the science from an epidemiology perspective that still continues to come out. One of our good friends, Josh Hayes at First Baptist Waco, along with Byron Johnson at Baylor, wrote, I thought, a very helpful article on balancing the science with also the good of worship and just how we do that in our considerations. How are you personally and your leadership teams balancing the science and the real concern we must have about gathering with this inborn desire, which I think is a holy desire at its best, to gather together as the people of God and worship. How are y'all balancing those things? And whoever wants to go first.
I said a moment ago that we've played it pretty safe in our staff. We've really gone out of our way to do our homework, and I think that's been a really that's bought some grace on behalf of the congregation. You know, they said, well, you know, our staff are taking their time to really figure out what the science is saying, and so I think that's been really good. We've got a lot of leadership capital we've kind of cashed in on during this time. We started slowly coming back, and I think that's been helpful. We're hoping that we don't have to backtrack too much. I think that's the, you know, the fear right now with numbers spiking in San Antonio is that we might have to backtrack some of the things that we've started to do. And I think that's going to be the real stress point for us when we start to do that. But I think I've felt this tension most palpably in my choir. So we've been doing Zoom Wednesday night stuff. You know, their singing really is at the core for them of their identity. Right? For most congregants, you know, singing is an important thing, but it might not be the reason they come to church, and maybe it shouldn't be the reason any of us come to church. But for some people in the choir, you know, that is their greatest connection point to their faith, and so. You know, trying to balance, and it's definitely not safe for choirs to join together right now. So how do we still have that community? And so we've been doing, you know, study together and praying together in a way that's above and beyond what we would have typically done when we were working on so much music for presentation. But yeah, I felt that tension so much, especially with the choir.
Matt, what about y'all on your decision making?
Yeah, so we've been keeping it safe as well. We have weekly conversations, whether through our Sunday school or through our Bible study, just keeping up to date with what's going on, and just going forward and making decisions with that. Being that our congregation is pretty small, a lot of our conversations are really just like, well, how do you feel? What do you all feel about what's going on? And my pastor's been really good about sharing information with us, and all of us just sharing, you know, research and information, and just taking that and committing it to prayer, and also figuring out what to do. Singing is crucial in the Black church. I mean, it's right up there with the sermon. So especially with the choirs, it's been a challenge to not come together to sing, whether it's, you know, with the entire congregation or whether it's just with the choir. I mean, that's just a huge part of our identity.
Yeah.
And with the church closed, it's like, okay, well, what do I do? What do we do? But also we want to make sure that we are being safe. Our choir is not big. Our adult choir is about 11 people. And I thought about this as talks of reopening taking place. I was like, I wouldn't even consider having a rehearsal right now or putting the choir back up, because our space, even in our choir stand, our space is so small that, you know, we were already sitting up there tight pre-COVID, but we were not able to adequately space out. And I wouldn't want to run the risk of anybody getting sick, because just with our folks, most everybody has some type of health challenge or has something that just to be safe. I'd rather be safe than sorry. So just having those conversations have been great, but also just knowing that we aren't able to gather together to sing right now, but we are still keeping in community with one another.
That's helpful. So let's get kind of to why we're here, to talk about the practical things. And those that are watching, I know just in looking at the names, there is a lot of music ministers on here. Man, ask your questions, give your insights. We want to, to this to be a conversation. So how are you adapting? What are you learning? What are things, if we can't sing together in person or Zoom, how are you adapting? What are you learning? What are some practical considerations that you're going through?
I've learned, I think it's different for most congregants to sing with a mask than it is for those of us who are trained vocalists to do so. I put mine on and sang for about 10 minutes and nearly passed out, but it doesn't seem to be quite as challenging for our congregants. We haven't had the pushback, and we haven't had anyone pass out, which I'm really grateful for, in the time that we've been singing with masks on. And so we started with only 2 songs the first week we were back, and now we're doing 3. I don't think we're going past that anytime soon, but it is, as Matt said, it's so crucial to what we do that it feels so odd not doing that. But I think we're taking all the precautions that we can to limit spread and to not have that happening in our worship space as we sing. I think, as I said, Trinity is not your typical large Baptist church in a lot of ways, and they never have been. And so I would say, for me, Baptists are really a best practices sort of people. We, because of local autonomy of the church, we have the ability to draw upon resources from other traditions that work for our local context. There is no, authoritative Baptist liturgy or worship order, and so we have the ability to draw upon some other things if people in the congregation will be patient and are willing to learn and grow. So over a period of the last 3 years, I've introduced a few more things like responsive readings. So right now, each week, in place of a song, we're doing a psalm responsive reading. And that's been a really powerful and meaningful thing for our congregation. We've also drawn on the practice of corporate lament, and that's been more challenging for people, especially as we're dealing with racial issues and divide in this country. That's not easy to talk about it generally, but to do so in the context of a worship service charges that a little bit in a different way. So we've been really thoughtful about how we've used those things and brought in some stuff from other traditions, but we're doing that slowly, and thankfully that's a practice we started beforehand. We're not just turning on the faucet and drowning people in this moment, but it is something that's new and challenging in a different way.
I want to come back to that concept of lament for multiple reasons here in a minute. But Matt, let's first hear from you. How are you all adapting? Because I know Greater Bosqueville. I know your pastor well, Ron. So y'all weren't streaming before, right? So this has been all new skills. So how are y'all adapting?
It's pretty funny because we live streamed our first service literally the Sunday before all the churches closed. It was just, hey, let's try this, just to make sure that it would go through. So we live streamed one service, and then that was it. So that's been a conversation as far as when we return to the church building, what will live streaming look like for both those who are in person and those who feel comfortable staying home. But what we've been doing, we've been utilizing praise teams. So when we have our pre-recorded music, we rehearse our band, about 3 people in our band. We have keyboardist, drummer, and bass guitar. And our praise team includes myself and our first lady, our pastor's wife, and another person in the church. So it's 3 of us, and we rehearse our music, and we sing, and that's the extent of the music. So when folks are watching the video from home, they're invited to sing along, but it's just been the 3 of us with music. I think moving forward, in place of the choir, I definitely think the praise team will be a major part of the presentation of music, solos, instrumental music. So kind of like where you are, Jacob, as far as where you are in service, those are the questions that we are thinking through and processing now, so that when we return, because we don't know when we're going to come back yet.
I think if we hadn't had the live streaming technology in place before we began, I would 100% be pre-recording like you all are. There are too many variables that can go wrong if you don't have all that in place. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Jacob, talk a little more about lament. I mean, there's been a lot written. Well, there's just a lot to lament over the past few months and weeks in particular. And it's not something that most churches do, or many churches, I'll say that, do well or have experience in. How, and Matt, if you want to chime in on this after Jacob as well, you're welcome to, you don't have to. How are you addressing that? How are you bringing that up? What are the practices that you're doing to help that?
So again, we're not a church that, I mean, in the Baptist tradition, that typically deals with things like corporate confession or prayers of lament. And so I think the lament specifically was new to my congregation when I kind of stepped into this role. So we've done a few corporate confessions over the last couple of years, and that's kind of gotten people a little bit more used to it. I think we've drawn upon some resources that are really helpful. The Worship Source Book is a book by the Christian Reformed Church, Calvin Institute for Christian Worship, and it has some pre-written prayers of lament that work really well. I think I've tried to, when I've had people who've kind of pushed back a little bit on things, I've pointed them to the Psalms and said, hey, look, there are a lot of lament Psalms. And these people were dealing with a lot of challenging things, just like we are. It's a valid way to talk to God and about God. And so we've used some pre-written ones. We've also had some of our staff members write prayers. Christopher Mack, who was a chaplain at Baylor, but who also is on staff here as our young adult pastor. Christopher, being an African-American in our predominantly Caucasian context, he's been able to speak into the race conversation in a way that I wouldn't dare in the same way, or it would be more challenging for me to do. So that's been helpful. But in the beginning, we started by lamenting that we couldn't gather together. That was before race riots and things here in the country, and such unrest. And so we started by lamenting the fact that, oh Lord, how long until we're able to gather together again, or to sing together again? And I think that was an easier starting place. That was much more identifiable for most people. And so taking it the next step, when so much injustice is happening, that we were able to make that curve. That doesn't mean that we didn't have people push back, and that, because I think that was the most challenging thing we've done in worship in recent days. And so that, yeah, it comes with, you have to be ready to answer questions always, but I think that was a challenging one for us.
Matt, anything you want to say on that, or how y'all are dealing just with, COVID in particular, just the loss of that and helping your people grieve that?
Yeah, so pre-COVID, lament wasn't like a part of our worship service. But as we've gone through just what is going on in America today, we've allowed space for it, especially when we're gathering together on Zoom. We make space to lament, to ask the questions, and to give the language as to how to lament, because I think that's what the issue is. So you don't have the faucet effect of like, here's how to lament. People need language. How do you do it? And we go, as Jacob said, we go to the Psalms. So like that has been, introduced slowly but surely. And I definitely believe that as we move toward continuing to worship online and then moving toward in person, that will be a great part of our worship service. I know that I think a few weeks back, Dr. Reed said something, and I don't want to mess it up, but he was talking about praise and lament. And I know especially I've noticed, like, since COVID has taken place, a lot of folks, I'm excited to get back to the praise. Oh, I can't wait to praise. I can't wait to praise. But then how do you appreciate the praise without experiencing the lament? You know, the lament is like the lens where we see and we get to praise. And it's like you have to have a balance of both so that you can fully, I guess the worship becomes full, if you will, where it's like one doesn't lack. Mm-hmm. But with the praise comes the sadness, comes the questioning, because it points us back to not just what God is doing and has done, but who God is to us. So just making sure that those two elements of worship are present will be my focal point.
I know I always appreciated both of you in Truett Chapel for that. No, and Truett Chapel, you can do some things perhaps you can't do in just every church, because it's a little bit of a lab to experiment, I think. But through tempo, through volume, through instrumentation, through voices, through songwriters, lyrics, so many different ways, y'all helped us lament and carry us through to highs and to lows, and I always really appreciated the ways y'all intentionally did that, and I'm sure you're doing that in your churches. It's worth pointing out too, you both have really excellent pastors and supportive pastors and staff, though different sizes, still knowing everybody at Greater Bosqueville and many at Trinity. That certainly helps when the staff is on the same page and talking about these things together, and their support throughout. That definitely helps. We've had a few questions come in, and again, if there's other things y'all want to chime in on, guys, feel free to jump in there. One is on virtual choirs. Have either of you tried virtual choirs, and how difficult are they?
Matt, have you tried one?
I have not.
Yeah.
I have not tried a virtual choir at all.
I probably got the production staff to do it. I've got people in my team who know how to do all of those things. We're multi-tracking recordings that we do and post-producing stuff. But it's such a learning curve for my choir. And the honest truth is the product is never as good as you hope for it to be. And so I've hesitated to do that. I know it's a virtual sensation and all of that, but I think once you get past the sensationalism of it, unless they're a group of studio singers, it doesn't ever really sound all that great. So I just didn't think it was worth my time. We could better use our resources in different ways. We've pre-recorded a lot of music and videos, from piano and organ duets to praise bands and whatever, and so we've decided to use our resources differently.
So you don't just get everybody on one call, press go, and sing? I
Ooh,
really assume that's kind of what happens.
It's rough.
We watched a couple with my kids when they first came out. One of them was the cast of Dear Evan Hansen, I think, on James Corden. And my kids they're like, why aren't we doing that? Why isn't church doing that? Those are amazing. I was like, well, like you said, not professional singers, and there's a lot of work that goes into that. But they are. I have enjoyed listening to some of them.
For sure.
Second question, specifically for Jacob, but I think both might be able to weigh in. How do you decide what to use as far as your responsive reading and other elements other than congregational singing? And how do you try to tie those into the sermon or series?
I'll speak to specifically the psalm responsive readings I was talking about earlier. So my pastor is preaching through the book of Acts right now. We don't normally do full books like that, but it's seems appropriate in this season. And so what I do when I'm on my game and on my best days is I always, regardless of what text he's preaching, I go to the lectionary and find passages that they've suggested work and complement one another. And so there's always a Psalm passage that complements a New Testament reading. And so I'll find those. And some weeks I might say, oh, I think there's a better, in my own personal study, there might be a better Psalm that I think works with where he's going with the message. And we're communicating about that throughout the week. So for those, let me grab, there's a resource called Psalms for All Seasons. It's a psalter, so there's songs in here for all 150 Psalms, but there are also, all of the Psalms are split up into responsive readings. And so that's super helpful. And personally, I like to use the entire Psalm. I know that creates, you might have some things that you read through and you go, oh, that's a little troubling, or I'm not sure how, normally I would want to explain that or do some exposition on that part of a text. So we've kind of kept the Psalms intact, just as reading them as a congregation in that way. I saw the worship source book was also put up, Jack put it up in the comments on Zoom, and that's a fantastic place to get responsive readings, calls to worship, prayers of lament, things. That's typically my first go-to resource. And if you've got specific questions, feel free to message me and I can point you to some other resources too.
One thing y'all mentioned today, earlier on especially, that I haven't really thought about, but it strikes me, is that part of your approach during this time has been to open scripture and pray with your choirs and to ask them, I think, Matt, you specifically, that how are you feeling? And, you are pastors as well of this area of the church and those that are in your choirs. And that seems to be, as it just strikes me as you were both sharing your heart about this, such an important role right now to just, beyond performance and singing, care for the people that aren't able to use those gifts right now, and to tap into that and to be a good pastor to them. That feels like just an important thing to say and an evidence of good ministry on both of your behalf, I think. Any words on how you're doing that, how you are just caring for your people?
I know that the Zoom burnout is real, especially if you're on Zoom all the time.
Amen.
So I send text messages to folks just to check in to see how they're doing. And also, if you don't feel like responding, I completely understand that, because we're all going through things. Maybe you don't feel like talking about it today. Maybe it's later on. So just sending messages or doing phone calls, as opposed, in addition to the Zoom meetings, has really helped me connect.
That's good.
Yeah, that's great. In addition to my assistant and I both taking choir members and orchestra members and whatever and doing all this, we split up the whole church that way amongst our deacon body, and the deacons took turns calling every single person on the church books, and using the time to update contact information too, which was a really dual purpose sort of thing. But that's been really meaningful in our context. I also we did a Wednesday evening Zoom call since March with my choir every Wednesday evening, and we went through the Sing book. It's part of the Keith and Kristen Getty. It's published by Lifeway. They're really cheap, $5 a copy or something if you order them in bulk. And so we used that the choir over the last couple of months, and that's been good, 1 week at a time. I think the purpose was to talk more about how is music a part of our corporate worship, and what does that mean? I think the unintended consequence is that it made people hunger for it even more, which might be troubling in this stage. It might be, I don't know any books that try to quell people's interest in singing and worship, and I certainly wouldn't want to read them. But I think that it had that consequence of people saying, man, we will be so joyous when we are able to gather back together, and we're not going to take this for granted in the way maybe we have. And so even though Zoom fatigue is a huge thing, and it's definitely, towards the end of that study, I saw people tapering off each week. I think when we are able to do whatever the next phase is, I expect numbers to skyrocket back up, when we can.
Emily Smith, who had led one of these, this epidemiologist, works at Baylor. And Jacob, maybe you can speak to this since y'all are back. She asked about just how can you speak to churches that are resistant to wearing a mask during singing? How have y'all handled, has anyone just refused to wear a mask when they come to church? How do you church them? How do you handle that?
We had a contingency plan for that the first week.
Yeah.
And in fact, we told all our ushers and greeters, if you do encounter someone who's belligerent about it, we have off-duty police officers on campus on Sunday mornings. You handle it as best you can, and you take them to them. That was kind of our response. We had masks at the door to hand out. We had someone a few rows behind me. Les made the comment from the pulpit. One day we're wearing masks now, and one day we won't have to. And I heard someone say, "Well, we don't have to now," and that sort of thing, out loud. And I went, "Oh, okay, all right, I get it." It's a mixed bag.
Yeah.
And so, but we've been, again, we've just tried to over communicate. We are going to wear masks when we gather together. You're encouraged to stay at home and join in. We're tailoring the worship experience in many ways to our at-home congregation. And so, I think I haven't taken the brunt of that. I'm sure our senior pastor's gotten a few more comments from people than I've received, but we put in place plans for that problem to arise, and it hasn't yet. Praise the Lord.
Have you visited, either of y'all visited with colleagues, peers in ministry that have had to deal with this yet, or just how they're dealing with this?
I know people who are taking it in a different approach to it, and so I think, it's a mixed bag. I haven't heard of anybody who's had a major issue, but I'm sure there have been.
Yeah, same for me. I haven't heard of a major issue, but there has to be somebody.
I've heard of a few. I'm hesitant to tell the stories because it'd be real easy to trace it back, but I think there are some that have been obstinate, that have just come in to sit on quote unquote their pew, and doesn't matter where it. In those cases, from what I've heard and visited with pastors, they've handled that in the week. That it's real, particularly if they come in a little late and the service has kind of already started going, or you have to make some difficult decisions there. I think the best, if I were pastoring, let's say that way, and was dealing with that, I think developing a theology of hospitality is really it was about one of the most helpful things of this is about denying our personal rights for the sake of the other, and creating a welcoming table for as many people as possible to be here. I think that is the approach I would take in communicating it to those who do feel this is ridiculous, or that we can all come back. But as we all know, in a lot of churches, but churches in Texas seem to have a pretty strong percentage of strong-minded individuals, to put that nicely, that and a lot of differing opinions, politically, theologically, on everything. That's there. It will be some difficult decisions, but I do think to protect our people, those are, and our community at large, those are decisions worth happening. Can you imagine, right? I feel like the church as a whole has done well during this COVID season, and has shown resiliency in many different ways to worship and to witness. And we don't want the end of that story to be the second wave precipitated predominantly by churches gathering everywhere. But that's tough. We're just not used to requiring something like that of church people. Others that are doing RSVP and registrations, things like that. There's just something within your mindset that somewhat rebels. Like, well, you can't tell me to RSVP. Oh, no, we have to. For all of us, we have to do this right now.
Right.
Well, y'all, thank you for being on here. Thank you for your time. I know you each have a lot going. Thank you for your ministries and your witness to many that undoubtedly is affecting and helping so many people, as some of the comments I've already spoken to. As we leave, would you have a final blessing or encouragement to give those that are watching today?
Yeah. I was reading something on the way, or while I did fly last week, and so I'm a bit nervous about that. So I'm being extra careful this week. But I was reading from, it's a book called What is Jesus Doing? Which I started reading a couple months ago and read a few chapters, but put to the side until I was coming back the other day. There's a chapter on rethinking the church in a post-Christian age is the title of the chapter. And this quote really spoke to me, and I thought, man, I've got to find a place to share this. And this was when you asked the question about a blessing, I thought, man, this is exactly so it's not my words. But it says, every Sunday morning when the pastor walks to the front of the church and greets the congregation in the name of the Lord, she may know that indeed the Lord has been at work to bring these people together. She may not look out over many. It may not be the kind of people she hoped for. They may lack creativity, openness, or generosity of spirit, but these were the ones that Christ brought together. And because he is gathering them to himself, Christ is in their midst. Likewise, if the pastor is to be thought of as an ambassador of Christ, sent by Christ to represent him to his people, then the congregation may also know, looking at their pastor, that Christ has not forsaken them and is continuing to gather them through word and sacrament. And I think it's really, really challenging right now. I think there's a lot of anxiety for me. And when I see 175 people gather, I kind of went, oh, this is too many people. You know, there's I wish 100 people had shown up instead of 175. And I keep having to remind myself, these are the people that Christ has gathered. As you talked the article earlier, you know, people need to be here. And for some people who have no other source of community, this is their this is the place where they not only encounter God, but they encounter love and generosity of spirit and hospitality, as you said. And so I read that, and I just kind of had to check myself, and it relieved some of my anxiety, and to know that just Christ is going before us and in the midst of what we're doing, regardless of who's there and how many are there, and whether they're generous or not. You know, if they're troublemakers or not, they're there to encounter Christ. And so that just brought me a lot of peace and comfort as I read that.
Good word. Matt, you get the last word.
Yeah, a few things come to mind. Psalm 46 is one of my favorite psalms. Speaking of God as our refuge and strength, a very present help in the time of trouble. And just reflecting on that, I just want to encourage everyone that everything is going to be all right. We don't have a definition of what all right is. This is all brand new to us. But everybody is learning and doing what they can as best as they can. And just knowing that in the midst of all of this, that God is still with us. God is still here to help us, and God will carry us through it all. So just knowing that he is with us, he is an ever-present help, and just letting grace abound toward one another, towards a pastor, towards our leadership. It's going to be okay. It's going to be all right.
All right. That's a good word. Guys, thanks again for being on. I'm thankful for your friendship. I'm thankful for your partnership in ministry. And I hope to see each of you soon when we can grab a cup of coffee or a meal and discuss this stuff in person and look back on it. But
Yes.
Have a great day. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. We'll be with you soon. Bye-bye.
Thanks,
Right.
Matt.